Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Chatting with Charlie, where we're going through the April Visa Bulletin. Hi, Charlie. Welcome.
Hello, it's a pleasure to speak with everybody today.
So, we want to go through the April Visa Bulletin, and we saw some significant movement, which we're going to talk about. So, let's start with our family based. Charlie, we see some forward movement in many of the categories except the F2A. Any comments on those?
No, I think these were a kind of long expected movements. I had been anticipating that they would start making these type of movements earlier in the year, but more incremental than these large scale movements. But this is very positive for the family sponsored applicants.
Okay, and then if we go to our employment base and we look at all chargeability, it's still current for EB1, but then when we look at EB2, we see some movement, which is great, especially for our national interest waiver applicants. And then EB3, we also see some movement. Any comments here?
No, again, these were, as I've been predicting, the quarterly movements. This is for April, the start of the third quarter. So they did make large movements. The employment first preference will remain current for the entire year. We don't have to worry about that. Again, very nice movements in the second and third preference categories.
Okay, and then if we move to China, so no movement in EB1. It's been standing at the same date since October 2024 when the fiscal year opened. And then we see some significant movement nicely in EB2 and EB3. Any comments here?
On the China employment first preference, I think that this date is likely to hold for the remainder of the year. I hope that I'm incorrect, but I'm not confident. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the India slide. But again, I think that any China first preference applicants should assume that this November 8th, 2022 date will hold through the end of the fiscal year. A very dramatic movement in the China second preference and third preference, which bodes well. I would suggest anybody that had not already filed for adjustment of status do so as quickly as possible and act on their cases in a very timely manner.
Okay, so let's move to India. Great movement in India. All three categories have moved. Any comments there, Charlie?
The fact that India moved indicates to me that the State Department is determined that there will be, quote, otherwise unused employment first preference numbers under the annual limit. When they make that determination, at that point, any of those unused numbers, say if they decide there's going to be 5,000 unused numbers, those 5,000 numbers can be made available strictly in priority date order to applicants. And I think that's what they've done. They've determined they're going to have extra numbers. So those extra numbers are going to the India first preference because the Indian applicants have the earliest priority dates. And that's why I said that I believe China employment first will hold because there's not any extra numbers based on their priority dates can go to them. So a very good sign for India. Hopefully that will move forward slowly, but again, do not get your hopes up until you actually see what the May or the June date is for India first. Nice movement in India second, and excellent movement in India third preference category.
But this is aligned with what you have said, which is that we'll probably see movement during the quarters, right?
Yeah, this is actually the start of the third quarter, but it does align with the movements, and many of the movements are equaling out to the average predicted movement over the period of time. But a couple of them across the board, both in the family, the rest of the world, the China and India, are much more than I would normally expect.
So this is the third quarter because their fiscal year starts in October,
Right.
right? So once we hit the fourth quarter, then we might see no movement.
Yes. And one thing I am a little concerned about is that the fact that some of these dates have moved so dramatically, it raises a concern that in doing so, that if the State Department's estimates of number use based on these moves proves to be incorrect, they may be forced to either retrogress dates in the summer months or make categories available. Again, so although these look nice, it does increase the possibility that some type of corrective action may be required later in the fiscal year. I would feel that it would have been much more prudent to move the dates at slightly less aggressive pace because they know they have so much demand. They can afford to move the dates later in the fiscal year and avoid the potential for retrogressions or unavailable and still reach the annual limits.
So do you think for May, Visa Bulletin, there's going to be any movement backwards, or you think that it'll actually just stay at the dates they've moved it at?
I think they will at least hold the dates for a period of time. Again, we may get lucky and see some movement for the month of May, but I think that the odds are that it's more likely that they will hold the dates for May unless they see that there's a dramatic reduction in the amount of demand coming in for the remainder of March and the early part of April to justify movements for May. But again, I'm a little bit worried about what may happen in the summer months,
Okay.
and I hope that I am incorrect.
Okay, but for now, dates for filing employment base is closed, right? And so all the USCIS can really do right now is just issue approvals based on the final action date movements, the significant movement that we've seen for this month.
Correct. And anybody that was not, like I said earlier, anybody that was not able to file for adjustment of status earlier based on the chart B dates, hopefully they're getting covered by the date movements now and proceed quickly. But again, whether you're processing your case in the States or overseas, do so in a very timely manner to avoid any problems later in the fiscal year. And I always advised when I was at state applicants who were processing their case overseas, I always advised them not to reschedule their case for a later month unless it was absolutely necessary, but do not do so for convenience sake because I saw over the years countless times where people had done so only to find that when it was more convenient to process their case in the summer, suddenly the categories either retrogressed or became unavailable at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Any other parting thoughts? I know we're going to have our webinar at the end of the month that people can sign up for, but any other final thoughts you want to share about the April Visa Bulletin?
Just stay tuned and watch for any notes that the State Department may be publishing in the May Visa Bulletin to see if they put any type of notes warning about future visa availability. They did so last month in the bulletin about the employment fourth preference. They gave a warning about what potentially may happen in that. So again, hopefully they will provide any type of warning 1 to 2 months in advance of anything happening.
Yeah, so April Visa Bulletin had some good movement, so we're happy about that. And again, stay tuned and also register for our webinar if you want more detailed information about the Visa Bulletin. Thank you, Charlie.
All right, take care.